Sometimes the mind creates a strange illusion. It makes you feel like you're making progress when you're actually going nowhere. You revisit a conversation, a decision, a mistake, something someone said, something you wish you had said. And because you're looking at it carefully, it feels productive. It feels responsible. It feels like you're working through it. But here's the strange part. Some of the thoughts we spend the most time on aren't moving at all. They're looping. And the people most likely to experience this are often the people who care deeply about understanding themselves, who take their inner life seriously, who don't just dismiss what they feel, which is exactly why it's so difficult to recognize from the inside. Last week, we talked about unfinished thoughts, thoughts that stay because something in them never quite settled. But some unfinished thoughts do something else. They don't just stay, they begin to loop. Let me describe what this actually looks like. Something happens, a conversation that didn't go the way you expected, a decision you made, or didn't make, something someone said and the way it landed. And you think about it. You go over what happened. You try to understand the other person's perspective. You wonder what you could have said differently. You revisit the moment and search for something you might have missed. Then life continues. Other things happen. The day moves on. But later, maybe that evening, maybe a few days later, maybe weeks later, you find yourself back there again. And this time it feels different. A new angle, a different detail, a fresh perspective. So you think it through again, carefully, the same way you did before. And again, life moves on. Then it returns, and then again. This is the part that's easy to miss. Each return feels like progress. Each pass feels like movement. Each revisit feels like you're getting closer to understanding. Like this time, if you just think carefully enough, something will finally settle. But nothing settles, and the loop continues. So what's happening? The brain is doing something surprisingly reasonable. When an experience feels unresolved, when something doesn't fully make sense or leaves behind an emotion you haven't quite placed, the mind treats it like unfinished business, an open file, something that still needs processing before it can be stored away. So it keeps returning, often without you consciously choosing to. Most people recognize that part. But here's the less obvious part. Every time the mind returns to that unfinished experience, it generates a slightly different version of the same thought, a different emphasis, a different interpretation, the same scene, but with the camera moved slightly. And because the angle is different, it feels like something new is happening. It feels like progress. But often, it's the same unresolved experience wearing a different shape. This is what makes thinking loops so difficult to recognize. Repetition and progress can feel surprisingly similar from the inside. The mind keeps searching for a perspective that will finally make everything click. A perspective that will bring resolution. A perspective that will close the loop. The intention is good. The search is sincere. But sincerity isn't the same thing as movement. There's an important difference between thinking about something and thinking through something. Thinking about something means circling it, returning to the same territory, looking from different angles while remaining fundamentally in the same place. Thinking through something means moving. You begin somewhere, and you arrive somewhere different. Something becomes clearer, something changes shape, something settles. The loop happens when the first experience feels like the second. The effort feels identical. The attention feels identical. The care feels identical. But one is movement, and the other is repetition disguised as progress. That's the trap. Not because you're careless, but because you're careful. Thinking through something requires more than attention, more than effort, more than analysis. It requires a way to give what's happening inside you some form outside of you. Not because the outside form is the goal, but because things that only exist inside the mind never fully hold still. Every time you look at them, they shift slightly. They reorganize. They change shape, which means they never become fully visible. And what never becomes visible can rarely become finished. This is why some thoughts loop for months or years, even after enormous amounts of thinking. It's not necessarily because you haven't thought about them enough. It's often because thinking about them more, in exactly the same way, cannot give them the shape they're missing. So if you've spent years turning something over in your mind and it still hasn't settled, that isn't evidence that something is wrong with you. It isn't evidence that you're broken, or too sensitive, or too emotional, or incapable of letting things go. It may simply mean that what you're carrying has never fully found a form. It's still inside, still shifting, still unfinished. The loop isn't a character flaw. It's a process that hasn't found its exit yet. And recognizing that changes something important. Because the moment you stop confusing repetition with progress, you begin seeing the loop for what it actually is. Not the end of movement, the beginning of it. Next week, we'll look at a different kind of unfinished thought. Not a thought that circles, a thought that refuses to release. Something you've tried to let go of, deliberately, repeatedly, and it stays anyway. There's a reason that happens too, and it's not the same reason as this. If something in this video felt familiar, you can save it. Sometimes the first real shift isn't solving the loop. It's simply recognizing that you're in one and giving it a name. If something in this video stayed with you, you can save it. Sometimes just knowing there's a name for what you're carrying is enough to begin. This video is part of a series on quiet processing, thoughts that never quite reached language. Made by Clarity, a quieter place for unfinished thoughts. Thank you for listening until the end.